Welcome to Beyond the Blend, the podcast that goes behind the science and talks to the people at the heart of the lubricant market, telling the real story of the people who make the lubricant market move. With real insight and honest conversations, we aim to show off the people's side from across the entire lubricant supply chain. Join me, Steve Knapp, and Rob Taylor as we delve behind the scenes of the lubricant industry. Let's go. Let's go with a quick 5 from 5. Mark, city or countryside?
Oh, countryside.
Lose sleep or skip a meal?
Skip a meal.
Education or experience?
Oh, experience every time.
Predictability or excitement?
Excitement.
Words or actions?
Oh, actions.
Mark, thanks for that. Today I'm joined by Mark Lord, Managing Director of Aztec Oils. There's a real mix in those questions, but experience, excitement, actions. I think we're going to enjoy digging into those, Mark. Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Blend. Before we dive into maybe some questions, let people know a little bit more about you, your background, growing up, your education, what influenced you, and what do you do when you're not selling oil?
Okay. I don't do much selling anymore, but Mark Lord. I was brought up in Reading in Berkshire, originally born in London, went to school there, hated school, left when I was 16, never really fit in for me at all. First job was a trainee manager at Heelas, which was part of the John Lewis partnership in Reading, on a day release to college at Windsor. The only takeaway from the business college at Windsor was learning the difference between markup and margin. And it's quite remarkable how many people still don't know what the difference between markup and margin. But that kind of stood me in good stead in my early life. My father was in business. I worked for him briefly as well. That didn't work out very well. And he wasn't a very good businessman, and I learned a lot about what not to do. And I had a couple of businesses when I was very young, and they failed ultimately. I had to go out and get a job and ended up working for Hunting Lubricants in 1985. So I'm 40 years this year in my career in the lubricant industry, and hopefully a good few more to go. So, I started out, I was living in Warwickshire in the West Midlands at the time. So I was I was a salesman. I was pretty good at it. Developed a real understanding and a love of the lubricant industry. I have engaged in it and ever since really enjoyed learning more and more. Not having a structured background, I've got an inquiring mind, and I thought I really enjoyed learning the properties, the chemical background, their chemical formulations, etc. From Hunting's, I left after a couple of years and went to a little outfit called Bruce Benzol, which is no longer exists, but in Barnsley, which is why I moved up into northeast Derbyshire, which is very near where the plant is. That was in 1987. Only stayed there a couple of years. They were a very small company and they got into trouble and there was lots of change going on. And then I was approached by Tetrasil to join them to start their lubricant division. So when I went off to Bury, and that was quite an experience, very large autocratic operation. Everybody said, they spit people out very quickly there and you'll last 6 months. And I was there 6 years all told, which was quite a surprise to me and Clifford Schofield, I think. But I actually got on with the old man really well. I reported directly to him. And it kind of worked, but, it was a big family company. There was nowhere else to go from there. I didn't really enjoy it at all because I was restricted in so many different ways. So I wanted to start my own business. I initially went into partnership, very brief partnership with a customer of mine who had a lubricant business in Chesterfield. And I bought his partner out owning, so I ended up with 50% of the company. And that didn't really work because the company was in trouble. And I could have saved it and got it out of trouble, but my partner wouldn't listen to me. So we parted company and I started Aztec. And that was in April of 1995.
Okay, that brings us up to the Aztec space. Yeah. So outside. I mean, that's. I mean, just before we jump into what you do outside of work, interestingly, I was born in London. I lived in Wokingham after I left London by
Okay.
Reading. I used to spend many a time in Heelas on.
Okay.
Was it on Broad Street?
It was on Broad Street, absolutely. Yeah.
Because of the perfume counter. I remember having many a crush on the pretty ladies that were selling makeup and perfume at the front of the
There
Heelas
was a few of them. Well, I was at the back in the electrical department in the white goods selling fridges and freezers and cookers and stuff like that.
And never the twain shall meet, right? Yeah. So it ended up almost like by accident that you ended up in huntings, right?
It was a job, and I'd done one or two things. I was independent, so I was like 27, I think, when I'd done a number of things. I remember when Ian Curry offered me the job, who was the sales director there at Huntings, and he said, "Yeah, I'm sure you can do the job, Mark, but I'm just worried you're not going to hang around too long because you'll want to do something on your own." And okay, it took me quite a long time. Took me 10 years, but I think if you do things on your own, you become fairly unemployable because you have very, very set goals and set ideas about how to do something, and fitting into a corporate structure becomes really, really difficult.
Yeah, I've heard that said. That people say once you've worked for yourself, you're quite difficult to be employed, as you just described. So, while you were in Reading, would you have gone to any of the Reading festivals? Because I'm imagining they were in their pomp when you were.
Yeah, I lived in Caversham, so it was just down by just across the road. We could sit in our back garden and actually hear it when the wind was in the right direction, and it was always really exciting. And in the early days, security was quite lax, and we could kind of climb over the fence at the back and sneak in, So that was always good. Yeah, so I was certainly, that was in my day. I was into prog rock and had long hair and loons and listened to Led Zeppelin and Genesis and King Crimson. That was my background. I was in a band playing drums, pretty bad, really.
But, do you remember the name of the band?
Nomad, it was called, and we played a few local gigs, local parties, youth clubs, that sort of thing. This was. This was at school when I was 15 before I left. And then, I left. I went to Stoneham Grammar School, if you know the area. So I was, the other side of town. And all my friends sort of stayed on and went to, did A-levels and went to university, and kind of lost touch with them all, really, until fairly recently, about 5 years ago. One of my oldest friends from when I was 5 contacted me because he was getting married to a girlfriend who we all knew from school. He'd gone through the mill, they'd separated at when they went to university, and they'd had 3 disastrous marriages and then got back to the girl he truly loved. And so he got hold of his old mates, and that was quite funny that we all got together, and we're best friends. I mean, he went on to do law, and he's one of the leading mediators in the country now, but he was, and they all said, meeting up, said, "Well, you've done better than all of us, Mark." So that's education for you.
Yeah, well, how did that make you feel, being told that by friends and peers? Whilst you might, say, "But come on, we've all had a good kick of the ball." How did it make you feel?
Well, I suppose it was. I felt proud that I was justified in leaving school early and making my own way. And my kids went to university, and you try and set them up on the right path. But what does it really give you? I mean, there are lessons in life that you learn independently that are every bit and possibly more useful than a classic education.
I always reflect on that, because I left after 1 year of sixth form. I literally was in school to fund my beer money and meet girlfriends. I wasn't there for the learning side.
Well, the job's better than that, because you can earn more money and drink more beer and attract more girls if you leave.
well, the company car and the expense account was certainly the attraction of joining Caligas, as I did before I joined Shell. But you know what was interesting about that is I always said when I was in Shell, had I had a university education, I would have accelerated quicker through my career. But I don't know whether I would have had the same career because I probably wouldn't have had the same life experiences or interests, or I guess smarts around me would be the one way I would describe it. So I think we're kind of kindred spirits in that experience education side. And you answered it. You said experience every single time. And I guess that unpacks that you feel that that's a really important attribute in people who work for Aztec.
It's spotting opportunities, isn't it? And you say you work for Caligas. Well, I mean, when I started Aztec Oils, it's really daunting to set up a business. I had a wife and 2 kids to bring up, and I had to bring money in and start a business where you don't have any fat on your back. You've got to crack on. So I actually started a gas business as well because it was a cash generator. So Aztec Gas Supplies, and we were distributing for Shell, who were just down the road in Staveley. They had a filling plant there. And then I moved to Flow Gas. We took on the Flow Gas distributorship, and I used to play off the two against the other, you know, in a very aggressive way to get the best possible price, as you do. But that kind of generated and helped move the cash along. And then ultimately Flow Gas bought my business off me. And I wasn't really, because as the oil business was growing, they'd actually taken on a little oil business, and they had a salesman working for them who was selling oil, and he was just out of place in their business. So it was kind of a quid pro quo. Well, you know, we'll take your gas business off you, Mark, but you got to take this guy on, which was my first salesman, actually. And it's just, these are how these evolve. You know, you've got an open view of something, and it's the way that things just generate. I don't think you can ever map out a really clear path, and well, some people do, but mine has been spotting opportunities and then taking them and making them work, and never really knowing where the next opportunity is coming from. And I look today, I'm always looking to see whether there are opportunities, and if they feel right and I can think about, and the people are right, and it's all a people thing. I'm a big people person. Then, you know, you go for it.
I mean, that's a nice segue. You talk about opportunity. So you founded Aztec, and you talk us through that journey, and you talked us through to 1995, and I guess that was Aztec Oils, right? What opportunity did you see in the lubricants market that made you want to leap into that in a way that you have?
Well, it's what I'd known, having worked for 10 years for first Huntings, then British Benzol, then Tetrasil, buying into a small fuel and lubricant company that I knew I could make work, but the guy wouldn't let me make it work. So I left and started Aztec. They went bust 6 months later, which was on the cards. Their key guy who was running it alongside the two directors, me and the other guy, he joined me, and we obviously picked up a lot of business from there originally, so that gave us a little grounding. But you know, this was small. It was small beer. We were starting really, really small, fighting for everything, knocking on doors, delivering. You know, I've done everything. I mean, it was one man in a van. I've still got an old picture in my office which shows my a little Peugeot 504 pickup in the mess of the old Bolsover Colliery, because our site is based on Bolsover Colliery. It closed down in 1991, and it's a bit of a wasteland. And I had this small little unit, and I built a ramp to roll barrels down to the back of the pickup, and then, you know, got them off. There's a real knack of pulling a barrel off a pickup on your knee. Health and safety would not approve, but that's the way we did it, you know. Yeah, I always thought bouncing it on tires was more dangerous because it could come up and bounce
catch you
off
on
and
the
do
bridge
more
of your
damage.
nose.
So, but yeah, I've done it all. I've done it. I've filled it. I've sold it, purchased it, filled it, delivered it. You name it.
I mean, it's really interesting to hear. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm stalking you or anything, but you know, London to Reading to I mean, we're based over in the Peak District, so I know your area well. You mentioned Chesterfield. It seems as though there's this whole. My mum and dad still live in Chesterfield. It seems as though there's this very small world that we're treading here, Mark. So we're into the space where Aztec Lubricants exists, and you're being successful. You're winning business. You're growing the brand. Why is it Aztec Oils, by the way?
Lots of people ask me that. It just so happened I was sitting at home with my little boy, had a library book on the Aztecs on the kitchen table. And we were just sitting around as a family thinking, this business I'm starting, what we're going to call it? And Jamie's library book was there, and it had the little logo is an Aztec god, and it was in that library book. We copied it out, traced it out, and and that was it. Aztec's a really strong name. It's really, warlike, aggressive. It begins with A, back in the day, Yellow Pages.
That was important, right?
That was really important. Not so much anymore. And we could have gone for Aardvark, but that's a little bit weaker, Then we rewrite at the front. But, I think it's stood us in really good stead, and we've sort of grown from there. But, starting a business from scratch is really, really tough. And I know lots of distribution businesses that start and they're built just around the person who's running it, and you can never get past that, that stage of they can make a very, very good living, but it's them, and they're wedded to the business 365 days a year. And I was very much in that place, but I wanted to move forward and expand and get other people. So we started out just buying and selling. We were very, very closely associated with Greenline Oils, who became Exol ultimately. So Greenline had a big blending plant in Rotherham, and they made all the oil. They still blend all the oil there, and then they send it down to Wednesbury to fill it. And we used to buy from them. We used to buy tankers rolling in and out all the time. And in fact, we grew out of them in a sense that when Exol was formed by XL Lube down in the West Midlands and Greenline, Phil Martin, the MD, rang me up and said, "Well, we've got a chemist who I don't really need anymore, and I want to look after him. Why don't you give him a job?" And so that's a great idea, Phil. So Tony Breeze joined us and actually gave us the wherewithal to start manufacturing and blending oils. We were doing it in a very little way, but we suddenly moved into it in a much, much bigger way. And it was just investment, year on year, plowing all our profits back in to be able to manufacture. Today we make 90% of everything that we sell, or 95%.
Yeah, so because in the beginning it was just distribute. It was
purely distribution. Then we put tanks in, and we used to break bulk, so we'd then pack it off, and then we went into because in my background I had a lot of wholesale customers, and so we could, as long as you can buy it right, we could wholesale. And margins were very, very tight, but we'd give a very good service. We'd do like crazy small runs for people with their own label. It was all private label in the main where we started. And of course, we try and avoid that like the plague now, because it's so difficult. And in the volumes that we now produce, it's very costly to do very, very small runs for people. But, you've got to take what you can get. And yeah, as you start, you kind of take everything and then you evolve.
Yeah, and as you have evolved, I mean, we start to see, strategic choices about, things that where you expand. In research into this, I've seen that you've expanded into oil water treatment. I've seen you moved into Scotland. I've seen you've gone to the Netherlands. What's the whole story there, and how do you decide to do things like that?
Well, one thing follows on from another normally, Steve. So again, like I said earlier, it's not a grand plan. Sorry to disappoint, and I could build up some mythical kind of that I'm some sort of genius, but things come along. I mean, the first company I bought was Oil Line, which was a very, very old blender in Tipton. And again, one of the partners wanted out. They were doing badly. They were doing really badly. And I think they were on the edge of going under. And I came along and, bought one of the partners out and Alan Such, who was the other partner, he wanted to retire anyway, and it was a 5-year strategy trying to turn around his the business so he could retire, which he did. And in 2015 he went, and we closed the business down and put it into Bolsover. If I'd have had some the right people down there running it, I would have kept it open, but I didn't have the people, and that's what it all comes down to. It comes down to the right people. So there was a manufacturing, we built a certain amount of business. We then sort of put it into, the manufacturing unit. So running 2 manufacturing units never works. It's very costly. The same thing when we bought Caldo later on. So that was the first one anyway. And then the second one came along, which was Northern Oils up in Scotland, and they were a customer. We were a big supplier. So were Exol. They went bust, or they were going bust. I was a bit closer to them than Exol, and managed to buy them from the receivers. And the people there, I saw in Graham, the sales manager there, and Yvonne, the operations manager, some really, really good people with the ability to run their own business and the hunger to do it for themselves. And so, yeah, that was a fantastic purchase, because they've done exceptionally well. Built a really, really good brand. I mean, Northern Oils, they were selling under their own brand for a long time, but it was their choice to actually take the Aztec branding on and go for it, because they'd seen what a good job we've done of the branding. So, I mean, our brandings only, came about in 2018, 2019. We started to really market ourselves and push a brand out there and an image. And thankfully, with what's happened in the industry since, it was a very, very good thing we did, because it's enabled us to hold on to a lot of business and be able to withstand the huge kind of distributor business that was in the middle, buying from everybody and anybody, and really holding a gun to your head and saying, you'll sell it to me at that price or I'll go next somewhere else, and that's always been the problem, I guess, in our industry. There are lots of distributors who are very successful, but there's no loyalty, there's no continuity with those guys. They will just play one off against the other, and that's an uncomfortable space for a manufacturer to be in when you've got a big manufacturing setup. I employ 75 people in Bolsover, and you've got to keep the wheels on the bus, and you've got to keep everything moving and making sure that you're turning it over to make enough money to put food on the table for all your employees.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just reflecting on the story. You talk about distribution, and when I was in Shell, I started selling there probably 28 years ago. So we are talking quite some time back, and I remember the distribution model. And this is going to sound very disrespectful, but it was circumstantial at the time. We would put the salespeople that probably couldn't cut it in direct sales into distribution, because they would probably do less perceived damage, right? They were there because that was the easier of the jobs. Roll that forward to today, you've probably got some of the smarter minds and brains in the distribution space, because actually the complexity of running a business that isn't yours, but one that you're looking around constant investment, development, delivering goals, supporting. You could be talking about investment in trucks, in tankage. It was a real sort of journey of learning, I think, for some of the larger some of the sort of majors. But you guys have kind of filled this space and owned the space that I think really is testament to the decisions you made along the way, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in the business world, I mean, all this, it's always cyclical, isn't it? Businesses, they grow, they build off each other. You see acquisitions and businesses that get too fat, and then business starts falling away. The brighter guys, leave and think, yeah, I could do this, and then they go and they attack the businesses that they've left and take business. So it all moves on. And we've seen that, we've attacked and got business, and then we are being attacked and we've lost business as we've become bigger, and people have kind of stolen some of our pie. And that's a whole business cycle that's applicable to any industry, I guess.
What it is, and just in this sort of this whole space of growth and acquisition, you've mentioned a few times, and it's come through very clearly for me, people. You said people a number of times. It's the people. You've dropped names, just because you're connected, right? You people are clearly important to you. Maybe that's how you get things done. I don't know whether that's a trust thing. Let's explore that. But you've learned lessons about integrating business, and without feeding the answer, I imagine people is one of them. What would be
Sure.
some of the other aspects about learnings from integrating businesses and what makes it work?
You see a lot of businesses, and you look past the business, because the people who are it's the people who are driving it. They're making it happen. And you've got passengers and you've got drivers, and you've got to spot the drivers and then hopefully pull them forward and make them happen. And certainly, if I've spotted some fantastic people that are doing a great job, because I want to empower them. That's where I get my real enthusiasm and drive. You build a structure, and the day-to-day running of buying and selling lubricants is fairly kind of mundane. It's fairly straightforward. You've got a good product. You look at building the marketing of it, but then it's kind of enthusing people who want to get out and knock doors and prove it and make it for themselves. So my model, and it certainly held true during COVID and ever since, that our independent businesses have stood the test of time and are doing really, really well. The business I bought Caldo Oils in 2019, just before COVID, really bad time. And that's a really old-fashioned, third-generation business. They were doing all our small pack filling for us because they were contract filling for us. So there was a natural connection, and they approached me. Mike Scott approached me, and it was a lovely man. Sadly, passed away not long after he sold us the business. But there you go. But we looked at the whole business. We had this small pack filling. We had to make that work and carry on. But they had this offshoot business down in Devon, which was originally Devon Lubricants, that they'd bought. And there were a couple of fantastic guys down there, really talented, really driven. And, as soon as I met them, I thought, these guys are going to, I can just wind them up and set them on their way, and they're going to do really well. And that kind of proved to be the case. So we rebranded as Aztec Oils Southwest. They were a Q8 distribution, still are. They didn't want to kill the Q8 brand, and that's certainly not a problem for me, because it actually enhances and works well alongside the Aztec brand. There's room for a 2-tier supply position, which we've actually rolled that out now amongst the other distributors, and that's what they did. They grew the business down there. In the meantime, we were busy building in Bolsover so that we could bring over the small pack filling and enhance it in one site and reduce labour costs. And it's all about, costs now are so critical, especially in the current climate.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few things, but just to hover there. Driver versus passenger. I think that was an interesting phrase. Empowering people. What are the attributes of somebody that resonates with you, Mark, and would be successful within your business?
That's always difficult, isn't it? Because everybody's different, and
everybody
trying to spot the good ones from the bad ones is the most difficult thing you can do. You get a feeling, you get a sense. We started Craig Barnes, who runs our Southeast, is a unique character, and he's been incredibly successful. I'll never find anybody else like him, because I don't think anybody like him exists. He's quite a weirdo in a very nice way. And he's driven him and Sharm have driven a business from zero to, they're only in their second year, and they'll turn out this year at 1.7, 1.8 million from nothing. Quite a remarkable. And I just, approached Craig and said, here you go. This will be your business. I'll fund it, but you own 49% of it. And he said, well, I've got this really, really good girl that I'd want to bring in with me as well. So, okay, well, I'll give her shares in it as well. And so that's fine, as long as I'm in the driving seat with 51%. So, and that comes from learning a bad lesson when I first started with not having the casting vote. But, I drive and push these people forward, and it's worked incredibly well. We've got another one in the Northwest, which we set up in Warrington, and they will ultimately, it's a lot harder there in the current climate, but they'll make good and they'll really come out of it. And I get a real buzz from seeing those numbers and seeing their enthusiasm for making it work.
That's nice. The one in the Northwest, I just want to check that one. That's Andy Berry, right?
That's Andy Berry, yeah.
Right.
And he's been around a long time, and he worked with you at Shell, did he?
Well, here's why I just wanted to name check him. If it was him, Andy Berry used to be what we called an OBAM, an office-based account manager, and actually directly worked in my industrial lubricants teams.
Okay.
When I was lucky enough to lead that part of the business in the UK, and I have to say he was, without doubt, one of the most tenacious individuals I've ever come across. But I tell you something as well, Mark, he could smell business out like nobody else.
Yeah,
He knew where it was, and he could find it.
He's tremendously committed. I mean, Andy had started his own business oil-wise, and he was on a journey, putting every effort in, totally on his own. And we'd just started talking to him when he kind of, COVID had kind of killed him, because he hadn't been trading enough to get any help from the government. He actually closed the business down, and he went to get a job, and he went to work for SAR, I think. But we were in touch with him, and I said, "Hey, Andy, don't you really fancy doing this? Do you miss?" And he was hungry enough. I said, "Come on, I'll back you to do it all over again. But this time you've got the backing of Aztec, you've got our brand, you got everything behind you." And he jumped at the chance, and he's driving it forward.
That's fantastic to hear, and kudos to you, Mark, for that as well. Because sometimes putting your money where your mouth is one of the harder things to do, isn't it? Really,
I'm a risk taker, Steve.
Giving people that chance.
I'm a risk taker, and once you can only. I mean, some people are obsessed with money. I'm not, and I started with nothing, and I'm going to die. I'm going to have nothing, because we can't take anything with us. So I would rather enjoy my life, and I do enjoy my life. I enjoy the industry tremendously, and I've got enough personally. So I'll just drive the business forward, and hopefully share my vision with other people, and empower them to make lots of money.
Yeah. And we'll come on to some of the challenges that you've touched on just in a minute. But just one last question on this sort of growth journey. Do you see the acquisition? I mean, you don't have your roadmap. You've already told me you don't have this perfect plan. So you're going to say, I don't know, I'm sure. But do you see more acquisition on the way? Do you see more Aztecs regionally being?
If I could find, and it's all about people, the right people. If the right person came up to me and I could recognize, and they had kind of the balls to say, yeah, I want to do this, and I can do this. And, but yeah, I'd have to be convinced. But if I could see the right person who was prepared to put, because it takes a special person, there's an awful lot of people in that space, because salesmen are, there's an awful lot of salesmen out there. They might be good salesmen, but they're naturally quite lazy. And, you can't afford to take on anybody, because, you're going to sign up. If you're going to run your own business, you're signing up to 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. Your phone is always on, and you react, because that's the sort of people that you want. If the phone rings on Christmas Day and somebody's got a burst, then you've got to leave your family behind and put up with the wrath of the wife when you run down to the depot and get that oil for them while your turkey's going cold. That's the nature. Now, there's a lot of people, oh, I don't want to do that. That's just my family comes first, and my whole life comes first. And that's kind of understandable. I mean, everybody's got to have a good work-life balance. And Craig's got remarkable work-life balance, because he's got 2 little kids that he absolutely adores, and he always gets home at 4:00 for them. Although he's up at I don't think he sleeps, that man. He's up at 3:00 in the morning to get to his furthest drop, and he never ever stops. But yeah, it all comes down to the right person. And right now I've got nobody in my radar, but that could change. That could change.
Yeah. So it's the right person, the right behaviour, and the right attitude,
And the drive.
and I think that, and the drive. Yeah. I think that's a really, really interesting thing. I mean, you talk about that, in terms of salespeople being lazy. I find that there is, within organisations that we work with, almost a confusion, if you like, about how to sell today. With this sort of emerging of digital and social and AI and face-to-face relationships, I think it's a generation that's rebalancing itself to what is a normal. But what I do see within that, Mark, is that some people that are driving it and leading it and making it work, and some people that are sitting back to see what's going to happen. And I fear for those that are sitting back waiting.
Yes. Yeah, and it's the big structures that are always are going to have the most difficulty. Where the bigger companies, that how do you balance all these different brands? And you look at a company like Certas, who bought everybody up, and I sort of, they have their drivers, but back in the day, if you were a Shell, can't be comfortable at sitting there with Castrol in the same portfolio, because they are, they're competitors. Although there's talk about a potential merger that I read about recently, but I'm not sure that will happen somehow. I'm sure monopolies and mergers would have something to say about that.
That BP Shell merger, I mean, as I've touched on, I think that was mentioned the first day I joined Shell. So I think it's always been a murmuring and a muttering. So, but
there's lots of talk now with BP being kind of shedding their some of their operations, and certainly there's talk about the lubricant business being sold. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, but I mean, let's shift gear slightly. And it would be wrong to not bring this up in the podcast, because I think it's very relevant and right that we do so. Aztec, and you particularly, have taken a really strong stance on unfair trade practices, right? So particularly against lubricant dumping, and I'm assuming that everybody that's listening beyond the blend knows what lubricant dumping is, but you can expand on that as much as you like. But why was this an issue, of all the issues that are out there in the market, that you felt needed to be addressed? And what changes do you hope to see?
Well, what's happened in our industry has never ever happened before. And it's quite remarkable that an operator has come in from overseas and is currently moving 2,500 tons a month of lubricants that they're importing into the country and selling it at less than we can manufacture it for. And, we've proved all this. We've got all the data. We know exactly what's going on, and that's how it's happening. It's one bad actor. They ramped up their operation as the war broke out in 22, and it's got worse and worse and worse. And I've been calling it out because it's killing our industry. So it's been hugely frustrating for the whole. So I'm calling it out because nobody else will, and somebody's got to do it, for the sake of Aztec Oils, but also for the sake of the whole industry, because it's been hugely damaging. So I was very active in trying to garner support, and that's quite difficult in an industry that's so fractured and nobody talks to each other. We don't really have a body that actually pulls everybody together. So it was really frustrating. I managed to get an application with the Trade Remedies Authority, which is part of the Board of Trade. Trade Remedies Authority is set up to look at countries, particularly bringing product in and giving them an unfair advantage and damaging UK industry. So that's their remit. They're very, very prescriptive in everything that they want to see, and we go backwards and forwards with them. And they it's incredible the detail they want. And we were opened up to a full audit, and they visited our premises to look at exactly how we make lubricants. We've got nothing to hide. We're very, very open. Morris engaged with the TRA as well, and they had a full audit. And Morris are a much bigger company, a much more established company, and the TRA I had a meeting with on Friday, and they were sort of going through some of our data that we had to prove. I'm saying, I said, well, surely Morris, you've got the same stuff. Yeah, but Morris in their organisation, they're making a lot more money than we are, so it doesn't appear as a bigger problem where it's hurting us. It won't kill us, but it's certainly hurting us. Yeah, so I keep kicking back. I think we're getting close to a resolution, but I'll keep shouting and I won't give up.
I mean, I watched one of your presentations the back end of last year in Dusseldorf, and you've touched on it here, but the scale of the impact that you presented was significant, and the potential risk that you articulated was well presented into the room. Okay, well, Mark, I appreciate you sharing that position, and I do understand clearly the story behind that, and Aztec taking this very, very strong position. So thanks for sharing that high level, short view with the Beyond the Blend audience. We've covered quite some ground here today, I have to say, from Reading, 16-year-old working at Heelas, to now taking on something at government level around a cause. It's been fascinating to hear your story, and with so many insights and learnings for people along the way as well. I'm jumping around this people side of things and how vital that plays a role in your North Star, almost like your compass is around people. And that for me is something that's got me reflecting. So I appreciate that. But if we was to look back at 40 years, that's what you told me. I'm not aging you. You told me it was 40 years, right? 40 years in.
I don't look that old, do I, Steve?
Absolutely look blinding on it, mate. 40 years in the industry. What would be the major lesson, whether that's in leadership, business strategy, or personal growth, that you would share with somebody?
I guess being able to spot an opportunity and moving quickly without, and the beauty of being a small company driven by one person is you can spot an opportunity and you can move on it. Whereas if you're in the corporate world and you've got a bigger company, you will always look. And I've looked at other companies that we've tried to buy and haven't been able to. Sometimes we've been blocked because of our stance in the marketplace. But I will continue to look at opportunities, spotting the right people. And it's, I can't say it enough. It's about people. It's people all the time for me. And I'm trying to build a really good team so that I can step back. Ultimately, I don't run the day-to-day business very, very much, but I'm certainly steering the ship, and I'll be steering the ship for 10 years to come. I sold half the business to my staff in 2021, so that's like an employee ownership trust, a bit like the John Lewis model where I used to work. But And that is, okay, that's for deferred consideration. It's quite a lot of money, and I've got to hang around to make sure the company's making enough money to pay me out. So I'll be here for 10 years and, building and strengthening the team and kind of sharing my kind of wisdom with my guys, so that Aztec carries on stronger and stronger. I could have sold up and I could have made more money selling up, but the purchaser who was after me just wanted to close us down because we were a threat to them. And, that's, to me, it's the people, 75 families are reliant on Aztec in that's just in Bolsover. We've got numerous other people around the other sites, which feed off that as well. But that's the most important thing, and I'm not a sort of just buy companies to close them down. It's all structured, trying to see where we go. It's never nice to actually close down a business. Caldo wasn't very nice. We gave people lots of time, but it was clearly didn't make any sense to run an operation over at St. Helens. I felt for those guys, I really do. So because it's you have a responsibility, and I certainly have a responsibility to all the people that work for me. And that's my kind of takeaway.
I mean, thanks for that. I mean, there's a lot in there, but the two that jump out at me is remain nimble. I think that's really important. If you see an opportunity, go for it. I think sometimes we give ourselves reasons not to do it. So just go for it. And then clearly running through this conversation, put the people first, but be clear with them, empower them and be clear with them.
Yeah, so finding the right ones. We've had people who haven't worked out for us, but when you've got the right ones, you build on them and you never let them go, and you give them skin in the game. I'm a great believer in skin in the game. Ownership. And ownership. I think that's the key thing for the guys that I want to drive the business forward, because then they're running their own business.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned earlier the word empowerment as one of the things that you like to deliver on. That's probably a more fancy way of saying what you've just said, ownership. Yeah. And I like that. Mark, I'm very appreciative of your time and joining us on Beyond the Blend. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people tuning in and listening to this. Some of them you'll want to connect with you, some of them you won't. But if you want to, if there was a place that people were to go to, if they wanted to connect, where might you send them?
I'm prevalent on LinkedIn. You can send me messages through there, or anywhere really. You know where to find me. Everybody knows where to find me.
Mark Lord, Managing Director of Aztec Oils. It's been a pleasure. Thanks ever so much.
My pleasure as well, Steve. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Blend. Be sure to follow us to catch next and future episodes as we continue to explore the people within the lubricant market.